Is a man really just forgotten when the coffee pours and forks tap in a crowded mess hall? They mocked him lightly, pressed by laughter and habit, when the Admiral smiled and asked for his call sign, and he didn't answer. Then one memory surfaced, a single word carried like a worn coin, and the room shifted as chairs froze, breath stalled, and silence beat louder than any heart. Still that word stayed behind, and if you listen closely, quiet men leave echoes too. The mess hall always smelled the same at noon. Weak coffee, warm bread, a faint trace of disinfectant that never quite left the tile floors. Long tables ran the length of the room, scarred by decades of trays and elbows. Metal chairs scraped softly as people shifted their weight. Forks tapped against plastic plates. Somewhere near the back, a soda machine hummed, like it had its own opinions. It was Memorial Day, and the crowd was thicker than usual. Veterans sat shoulder to shoulder with base staff. A few cadets in fresh uniforms blended in awkwardly, still stiff, still unsure where to put their hands. Civilian volunteers moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling pitchers, wiping spills before anyone had to ask. Near the end of one table sat an older man with a chipped mug cradled between both hands. His hair was cut short and gray neat without trying to be sharp. His back stayed straight even while seated, not rigid, just steady. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was brief, polite, easy to miss. People noticed him the way you notice a clock on the wall. Always there, rarely examined. Then the Admiral walked in. He wasn't active anymore, not the kind who made rooms snap to attention. This was a retired Admiral ceremonial, now invited more for memory than command. He wore his age comfortably. His laugh came easily. His handshake lingered just long enough to feel sincere. The room responded without instruction. Heads turned. Smiles spread. Someone called out his name. He waved it off, weaving between tables, stopping here and there to trade a story or accept a joke at his own expense. "Same coffee as always," he said, lifting a mug someone offered him. "Guess some traditions survive longer than we do." That got a few laughs. He paused near the long table by the windows, where the light softened faces and dulled the shine on the metal trays. His eyes settled on the older man with the chipped mug. "Well now," the Admiral said, smiling, nodding toward him. "You've got the look of someone who's been around." The man lifted his eyes just briefly, then nodded back. A few people leaned in, sensing something light, harmless. The Admiral tilted his head, friendly, almost playful. So he said, tapping the table once with his knuckle, "What was your call sign back then?" It wasn't sharp. It wasn't demanding. Just a question tossed like a coin across a familiar table. A cadet nearby smiled, waiting for the answer. Someone down the line chuckled softly. The older man didn't respond. He looked down into his coffee instead, watching the thin surface ripple as if something had disturbed it from below. His fingers tightened slightly around the mug, then relaxed. The Admiral waited still, smiling, assuming the answer would come with a joke attached. The room shifted. A fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. A chair stopped scraping. The soda machine hummed a little louder, suddenly noticeable. "Well," the Admiral added lightly, "we all had one." A man 2 seats away cleared his throat. "Weather's supposed to turn later," he said too quickly. Another laugh followed, thinner this time. The older man stood. "I'll grab some napkins," he said, his voice low, even. No apology. No explanation. He stepped around the bench and moved down the aisle between tables. As he walked, he collected empty cups, stacked trays that weren't his, straightened a chair with a single practiced motion. He didn't hurry. He didn't linger. A cadet watched him go, noticing how naturally he moved, how he seemed to know exactly where things belonged. The Admiral's smile faded just a touch. He glanced around, then back toward the empty seat. Guess he forgot, someone muttered. But no one sounded convinced. The older man returned a moment later, placing the napkins neatly at the center of the table. He sat down, set his mug where it had been, and folded his hands. The question was still there. The Admiral shifted his weight, sensing it now. "Hey," he said softer. "Didn't mean to put you on the spot." The older man met his eyes. Something passed between them, brief and unreadable. The Admiral let out a small laugh. "Just one word," he said. The mess hall seemed to lean forward. No one answered right away. The mess hall didn't go back to normal. People tried. Forks moved again. Someone reached for the salt. A chair scraped, then stopped as if the sound felt too loud. The rhythm of eating returned, but slower now, careful, like everyone was testing the room before committing to it. The older man kept his eyes on the table. He unfolded a napkin, refolded it, then set it beside his tray. His movements were small, precise. Nothing wasted. Nothing rushed. If anyone expected him to explain himself, he gave them no opening. The Admiral shifted a few steps down the table, speaking to someone else, but his voice carried less weight now. The easy tone was still there, yet it floated instead of landing. So a staff member said quietly, leaning toward her neighbor, "Anyone need more coffee?" A few hands lifted. The refills came and went. Cups were topped off. Gratitude was exchanged in nods. A cadet barely 20 sat across from the older man. He watched the space where the question had been, as if it might reappear. He glanced at the man's hands, then at his face, then quickly away when their eyes almost met. "What do they mean by that?" the cadet whispered to the veteran beside him. The older veteran didn't answer right away. "By what?" he said. "Call sign," the cadet replied. "Isn't it just a nickname?" The older veteran took a sip of coffee. "Sometimes." The cadet waited. "Sometimes it's not," the man added. At the far end of the table, someone laughed too hard at a joke that hadn't earned it. The sound fell flat. "Well," another voice said, aiming for lightness, "guess we're all getting quiet in our old age." A few people smiled. No one followed up. The older man stood again, this time to collect a pitcher someone had left near the aisle. He poured carefully, not spilling a drop, then set it back where it belonged. "Thank you," a woman said. He nodded. "Of course." The cadet noticed how no one used his name, not even once. They spoke around him, about him, never to him. When sentences drifted too close to the earlier question, eyes shifted. Words changed course mid-thought. "Back when I was stationed," one man began, then stopped. "Well, back then." "Different times," someone replied quickly. The Admiral returned to the table, slower now. He rested his hands on the back of a chair, watching the older man for a moment longer than politeness required. "You know," the Admiral said, lowering his voice, "we all had funny ones. Mine stuck because it made the guys laugh." A smile flickered across a few faces. The older man didn't move. The Admiral cleared his throat. "No pressure," he added. "Just curious." "I understand," the older man said. His voice was calm, neutral. It didn't invite another question, and it didn't shut one down either. The cadet leaned closer to the older veteran again. "Why won't anyone say it?" he asked. The older veteran looked straight ahead. "Because saying it out loud changes the room." The cadet frowned. "How?" "Watch," the man said. But nothing happened. The older man sounds quietly, hands folded. "Now gaze steady." Around him, conversation kept skirting the same invisible boundary. Each time it neared, it veered away like a car avoiding a closed road. A spoon clinked against a plate. Someone apologized for the noise. The Admiral exhaled, slow and thoughtful. He smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "Well," he said with a small shrug, "guess some things are better left alone." No one argued. The mess hall filled with sound again, but it never fully recovered its ease. Beneath every exchange ran the awareness of what hadn't been said. The joke lingered longer than it should have. The mess hall found its rhythm again, though it was a quieter one. Trays slid forward in short bursts. Chairs moved with care. Conversations stayed low, as if the room had agreed without saying so, not to raise its voice just yet. The older man moved through it all like part of the furniture present without asking to be noticed. When someone stood to leave, he was already there. "I've got that," he said, taking a tray before it reached the edge of the table. "Thanks," came the reply, sometimes surprised, sometimes relieved. He stacked plates with practiced balance, wiping a spill with a napkin before it spread. He straightened a chair with one hand while holding 3 cups in the other. Each motion was small, exact, familiar the way habits get when they've been repeated long enough to lose their edges. The cadet noticed everything. He watched how the man never cut across someone's path, how he waited for a pause before stepping in, how he seemed to know when help would be welcomed and when it would feel like intrusion. No words announced what he was doing. He simply did it, then moved on. "That's nice of you," a woman said, as he cleared her place. He nodded. "Happy to." The cadet glanced at the older veteran beside him. "He does that a lot," every time the man replied. They watched as the older man carried a stack of trays to the return window, placing them down softly so they wouldn't clatter. He paused there, checking the counter, then turned back. "Why him?" the cadet asked under his breath. "Why ask him?" The older veteran followed the man with his eyes. "Because he looks like someone who remembers," he said. The cadet frowned. "Remembers what?" The older veteran leaned back, slightly lowering his voice. "Things that don't come with punchlines." They fell quiet as the older man passed again, this time collecting empty cups. He paused near the cadet's table. "Need anything?" he asked. "No, sir," the cadet said quickly. Then, unsure, "I mean, thank you." The older man smiled faintly, as if the correction hadn't mattered. He moved on. The cadet waited until he was out of earshot. "So call signs," he said. "They're not just nicknames." The older veteran shook his head once. Not always. But everyone had one right. "Yes." "Then why won't anyone say his?" The older veteran took his time answering. He folded his hands over his stomach and stared at the far wall where an old photograph hung crooked. "Because some names are earned in places people don't joke about," he said. "And some of them get buried with the day they were given." The cadet swallowed. Then why remember them at all? The older veteran's eyes followed the older man as he helped another table, listening patiently while a story rambled on longer than it needed to. "Because forgetting them would be worse," he said. The cadet nodded slowly, though his brow stayed furrowed. At the other end of the room, the Admiral stood speaking with a pair of guests. He laughed at something one of them said, but it was quieter now, contained. His eyes drifted back to the older man more than once. The older man finished his circuit and returned to his seat. He set his hands on the table, palms down, grounding himself. He didn't look around to see who had noticed. The cadet leaned closer to the older veteran again. "So if it's not a nickname," he whispered, "what is it?" The older veteran didn't answer right away. "It's a marker," he said finally. of where someone stood and what they carried back. The cadet glanced at the older man sitting still, now eyes forward. "And you only say it once." The older veteran nodded. "If you say it at all." The room seemed to tighten again, as if it had heard. Some words are heavier than ranks. The mess hall reached a point where time seemed unsure what to do next. People were still seated. Plates were still half full. Coffee cups sat warm between hands, yet nothing moved forward. It was as if the room had been gently, deliberately paused. The Admiral stood near the center aisle, one hand resting on the back of a chair. His smile had softened, losing its playful edge, but it was still there, familiar, human, meant to ease rather than command. He glanced once more at the older man. "Come on," he said lightly, almost coaxing. "Just one word. No challenge in it. No authority. Only curiosity wrapped in humor." The older man lifted his head. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. He raised his eyes the way someone does when they've finished deciding something that can't be undone. His gaze met the Admiral's, steady and clear. Around them, the mess hall waited. The cadet felt his chest tighten. Someone a few seats away stopped chewing. A hand froze mid-air, fingers curled around a fork that never reached its mouth. The older man straightened, pushing his chair back just enough to stand. The sound should have echoed. It didn't. He placed one hand flat on the table, grounding himself, then spoke. One word. That was all. It wasn't loud. It wasn't whispered. It landed exactly where it needed to. The effect was immediate. The mess hall went silent. Not the awkward quiet of a room unsure how to respond, but a complete, absolute stillness. Forks hovered forgotten. Chairs stayed where they were. Even breathing seemed to pause, as if the air itself had stepped back to make room. The soda machine stopped humming. Somewhere far off, a door closed, but it felt like it belonged to another world. The Admiral's smile disappeared. His posture shifted without conscious thought. Shoulders drawing back, spine straightening, as if an old memory had reached him before his mind did. No one spoke. No one moved. The older man remained standing, his hand still on the table. He didn't look around to see who understood. He didn't wait for recognition. The word had already done what it was meant to do. He wasn't slammed by force. He was slammed by silence. In that silence, the word carried weight. Not explanation, not history, just truth. The cadet felt it like pressure behind his eyes. He didn't know why his throat tightened, only that it did. Across from him, the older veteran closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, jaw set. The silence held. Seconds stretched. Finally, the Admiral nodded. It was small, respectful. The kind of acknowledgement that didn't need witnesses to be real. "Thank you," he said quietly. The room exhaled. Sound returned in pieces. A chair creaked as someone shifted. A fork was set down carefully, as if it might break something fragile. A breath escaped someone's chest, shaky and unguarded. But no one rushed to fill the space with words. The older man sat back down. He reached for his mug, lifted it, then paused. His hand trembled once before steadying. He took a sip. Conversation did not resume the way it had before. Voices stayed low. Movements remained measured. People looked at one another differently now, not with curiosity, but with awareness. The cadet stared at the table, replaying the sound of that single word in his mind. He realized with a strange clarity that he would remember it for the rest of his life. At the far end of the hall, sunlight shifted through the high windows, catching dust in the air. The particles hung there suspended, as if they too were waiting. The mess hall had not changed, but nothing in it was the same. Sound returned to the mess hall the way a tide comes back in. Slowly, carefully. A chair shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The soda machine hummed again, tentative at first, then steady. Forks touched plates, not clattering just enough to remind everyone that lunch was still on the table and time was moving again. The older man sat quietly, his mug resting near his hand. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. The Admiral stood where he was no longer leaning, no longer casual. His shoulders were squared now, not in command, but in recognition. The change was subtle yet unmistakable, as if an old habit had been reactivated without being summoned. He took a breath. Not a speech. Not an explanation. Just a breath. He looked directly at the older man. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the table without asking for attention. "Thank you," he said, "for carrying it." That was all. No rank followed. No flourish. No attempt to soften what had already landed. The older man inclined his head once, a movement so small it might have been missed if anyone had been looking for more. He wrapped both hands around his mug again, grounding himself in its warmth. Around them, people resumed their meals, but the mood had shifted. Eyes no longer slid past the older man. They rested on him, then moved away, respectful of the space he occupied. A woman across the table hesitated before speaking. "Would you like some more bread?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She passed the basket carefully, as if handing over something fragile. At the edge of the room, the cadet watched it all with a new awareness. The silence had taught him something words hadn't. He saw how the room adjusted around the older man now, how conversations curved instead of colliding. A veteran 2 seats down reached into his jacket, then paused, reconsidering. When he pulled his hand back out, a small coin rested on his palm. Its edges were worn smooth, the surface dulled by years of handling. He didn't raise it. He didn't announce it. He simply set it on the table near his tray. The gesture went unnoticed by most. That was the point. Another man glanced at the coin, then at the older man, and nodded once before returning to his food. Someone else adjusted the sleeve of a faded patch on their jacket, tugging it straighter, not to display it, but to settle it. No one asked questions. The Admiral stepped back, rejoining a small group near the wall. He listened more than he spoke, now his laughter quieter, more measured. When his eyes drifted toward the older man again, there was no curiosity left in them. Only respect. Conversation continued, but it carried a different tone. Stories were shared without exaggeration. Jokes were gentler. When laughter came, it didn't press against the moment that had passed. It flowed around it. The older man finished his meal and stood once more gathering empty trays as he had before. This time, people met his eyes. "I've got it," one man said, reaching for his own tray. The older man smiled faintly. "Thank you." As he moved through the aisle, someone shifted to give him space without being asked. A chair was pulled back. A path opened. The cadet watched closely, committing every detail to memory. He understood now that what had happened wasn't about correction or embarrassment. It was about alignment. The room had found it. When the older man returned to his seat, the coin was gone. So was the patch adjustment. They had served their purpose and receded. What remained was the quiet. Not heavy, not strained, just right. The mess hall had its noise back, but beneath it ran something steadier, a shared understanding that didn't need to be named. The older man lifted his mug once more and took a sip. His hands were steady now. Across the room, a few people exchanged glances, then looked away, each carrying the moment in their own way. There was no applause. There didn't need to be. Justice in that room didn't arrive with sound. It arrived with posture, with restraint, with the collective decision to see someone clearly and then act accordingly. And the mess hall, ordinary as ever, held that decision without comment. The library smelled faintly of paper and floor polish, the kind of quiet place where footsteps learn to soften themselves. Sunlight slipped through tall windows and settled across long tables, catching dust as it drifted lazily in the air. A few people sat scattered among the shelves, reading newspapers, filling out forms, turning pages with care. Nothing about the room announced importance. Near the front wall stood a narrow community board. It wasn't new. The cork had darkened with age, its edges worn smooth by years of tacks and thumbprints. Flyers overlapped in uneven layers: bingo night, blood drive, choir practice, a handwritten notice about lost keys. In the lower corner, a new card had been pinned. Small, plain, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A name. One word beneath it. The older man stood a few steps back, hands folded behind him, reading without moving. He didn't lean in. He didn't touch the board. He just stood there, letting the moment take the shape it wanted. No one had called him to the library. There had been no announcement. The card had appeared quietly, the way some things do when enough people agree they matter. A woman approached carrying a stack of returns. She slowed when she noticed him. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. She glanced at the board, then back at him. "It looks right there," she said. He nodded. "It does." She smiled, not broadly but kindly, and moved on. The cadet came in a moment later, still awkward in his movements, still learning how to occupy spaces like this. He stopped when he saw the older man and followed his gaze to the board. "That's it?" he asked quietly. "Yes," the older man said. The cadet studied the card, then the empty space around it. No ceremony, no need. The cadet thought about that. It's small. It's enough. They stood together for a while without speaking. The room hummed softly around them, the whisper of pages turning, the low cough of someone clearing their throat, the gentle click of a keyboard from the reference desk. Across town, the mess hall was already back to its routines. Lunch trays slid across tables. Coffee was poured. Chairs scraped and settled. People laughed at familiar jokes and argued mildly about sports scores and weather forecasts. Yet something lingered. Not as a sound, as an absence. That word still hangs in the mess hall, not written, not spoken aloud, but present the way certain memories are present, felt more than recalled, shaping the space without demanding attention. The older man stepped closer to the board at last. He didn't reach out. He didn't trace the letters. He only inclined his head, a gesture so small it belonged entirely to him. The cadet watched, understanding now that legacy didn't always arrive in frames or glass cases. Sometimes it arrived as restraint, as placement, as knowing when not to add anything more. "I didn't know it could be like this," the cadet said. The older man looked at him. "Most people don't." They walked toward the exit together. At the door, the older man paused, holding it open, while a couple entered. "Thank you," one of them said. "Of course," he replied. Outside, the afternoon moved gently. A breeze carried the sound of traffic and distant conversation. Life unremarkable and steady. The older man turned toward the sidewalk, ready to disappear back into it, the way he always had. Before he did, he glanced once more through the glass at the board. One word, in the right place. That was enough. If this story moved you, share it forward. And somewhere behind him, in a room filled with long tables and familiar sounds, a quiet remained held not by silence but by respect. Still the afternoon settled gently with sunlight on a library table and a small card resting on the community board, its single word written plainly and left exactly where it belonged. Then the kindness of the moment became clear, not the kind that asks for thanks, but the kind that stands steady like a lamp in a winter window offering light without calling attention to itself. Quietly, the lesson lingered. Respect doesn't need a return address, and dignity travels farther when it isn't announced. That word still hangs in the mess hall, not spoken now, but felt in the way chairs are pulled back, voices soften, and eyes look twice before judging. Quiet honor needs no applause.